All right, so my name is Jonathan Pyle. I'm a lawyer with Philadelphia Legal Assistance in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I developed Docassemble about 5 years ago. Docassemble is a absolutely free and open source platform for the development of web applications that look something like this. They ask one or two questions at a time, and at the end of it, they deliver either a document like the name suggests or deliver expertise in any variety of ways. It's designed to be very flexible. It's used all around the world by law firms, governments, corporations, legal aid organizations in 17 or 18 countries. And here's some examples of how it's being used. In the California court system, they use Docassemble to allow people to apply for a waiver of traffic ticket fees. And they have eliminated $800,000 of debt since they went live with this system. And they're using Docassemble because it's so easy to communicate with APIs using the system. In Boston, Massachusetts, they have a eviction defense system that assembles all of the documents necessary to defend against an eviction, including discovery. It's very complicated. I'll try to run it here. As you can see, you can click through screens. It has automatic text-to-speech if you want. You can embed videos and icons into the interview. You can have multiple choice. And the interface is designed to be friendly, simple, with lots of white space. It's also used by Upsolve, which is a nonprofit in the United States that helps people file for bankruptcy, which ordinarily requires a $2,000 lawyer. But they have managed to use technology, including Docassemble, to make it easy to file for bankruptcy. And they have discharged $150 million of debt so far with people who are going through a Docassemble interview. So the way that you would develop a web app using Docassemble is by writing code. And you could write code in the web browser if you've got a server, or you could write code in your favorite text editor. And you have access to the variables that you're using in your code. And the way that you create questions for the web application is by writing them in this format called YAML, which stands for Yet Another Markup Language. And so you can ask for the user's favorite number, and then if they put in the number 42, then something else pops up, for example. The way that you would specify legal logic for branch logic is actually fairly complex. Just like you declare a question as something that will define a variable, you can declare code. And you could say, like if the plaintiff needs to have what's called the next friend. I don't know if you have that in the UK, but if you're under 18, you can't file a lawsuit unless you have an adult with you. And then if you wanted to track information about that next friend, you could declare an object and then attach attributes to that object. So everything's written in a general purpose programming language, namely Python, but it's also very declarative. So it's kind of a mixture of declarative and procedural coding. And I picked Python because it was free of squiggle brackets. It was fairly easy to read. I would like it so that a lawyer could look at the source code for an interview, and while they might not be able to write it themselves, they could at least read it and figure out what's going on and see whether there are legal mistakes in it. The way that you would write a document is by using Microsoft Word. You can also assemble the documents from Markdown, and you have access to a toolbar that has a list of your variables, and so you can easily avoid making spelling errors when talking about what variables are in your interview. It's designed to be translatable into multiple languages, so that if you have a system of logic for English, you can simply produce a Excel spreadsheet right out of the server and give that to a translator, and they'll translate it into another language, and then you import that back in, and then you can support 5 different languages like the eviction defense interview does. It's designed to be customizable because I know that developers like to really MySpace the heck out of everything they create. So these are all different ways that people have adapted the skin of Docassemble to be whatever they wanted. And it's also designed to be extensible, which we'll talk about, the other presenter will talk about too, but just by way of an example, this is one that I created the other day. There's this API in the United States that's available now that will take any piece of a person's description of their legal problem and then tell you what legal category that problem represents using natural language processing. So this API has been there, but I think a lot of people don't know how to call APIs. So I wanted to be able to extend Docassemble so that you could just set the data type to the name Spot, because it's called the Spot API. And then you would instantly have access to the results of that API in a very readable way. And so just on 2 commutes, my 20-minute train ride to and from, I wrote 74 lines of code in an add-on package for Docassemble. So I was able to extend the functionality to do this with just a small number of lines of code because it's designed for extensibility, which a lot of closed source products don't really have. So why did I create this system? Well, I work in legal aid, and we have had various systems available to us in the past, but they've all been designed to be really easy to use by lawyers. And they've been optimizing for the difficulty of teaching a subject matter expert to code. So I was frustrated by these systems because every time I would try to use them, I would run into a level of complexity that I wanted to implement, but it was just too difficult given the simple way that they were making the functionality available. I wanted to just be able to, write some code to do it. And because I was a self-taught computer programmer, I knew what code could do, and I knew how easy it was to do stuff. But those systems didn't make that available. So I wanted there to be a system that was fully extensible with code. Not that I want people to spend time dealing with unnecessary complexity. Docassemble is a very high-level language for the problem of legal interviews and guided assistance. But I wanted to have the full functionality of the general purpose programming language Python available to people, because the sort of ceiling on complexity of these no-code tools, I think, is preventing us from doing what we need to do in the legal sphere to really maximize how we can use technology to increase the value of legal assistance. I work in a nonprofit organization that helps people with civil legal problems, and I'm very interested in expanding access to justice through technology. But before I worked in legal aid, I was a lawyer for a big law firm. And I always saw ways that computer programming expertise could be used to automate things that we were doing. And as the practice of law changes, and it's really, there's been at least a lot of discussion about the changing practice of law over the last 10 years, I think we need to make sure we have professional tools available to really capture the complexity of things. And you can read Richard Susskind. He has some great books about this. There's also some Americans who have written books about this topic. And one of the reasons why I am making this open source under the MIT license is because I really want them to be used in all areas of law, not just access to justice. The fact that it's free doesn't mean that it's lesser quality in any way or only suitable for pro bono work. So I have contributed the software to the Rain in Court startup, which serves big law firms. And they are now making that available on their platform for companies and lawyers who have interest in making sure they have really high security on the software applications that they run. And I also wanted to make sure that there was an open source way to create sophisticated guided interviews, because I think when there is a sophisticated platform for developing stuff, that really spurs innovation, especially among the startup industry. There are all these startups out there using free computer programming languages like Ruby on Rails and things like that. And if they had to pay money to use that baseline functionality, then that would be a huge barrier to entry for anybody with an idea. So I'm an advisory board member of the Merlin Open Source Legal Foundation, which is a nonprofit that currently I don't think has any particular money, but maybe they could have money like the Linux Foundation to fund open source projects in the legal space, so that if you're working at a law firm, you can have technology available to you that solves problems that are recur in the legal space, and you can extend them very easily, and you're not burdened by vendor lock-in or anything like that. So that's all I have to say by way of introduction to the system. But feel free to go to the Docassemble website, docassemble.org, and from there you can find a link to the Slack group where the Docassemble community talks about software development issues and things like that. It's a very active community of about 550 people from around the world. And you can also follow Docassemble on Twitter. But anyway, thanks very much, everybody.
Great. Hi. Thanks very much for including me in this event. Can you hear me? Just some people nod and I will be able to see. Yes, I'm seeing nods. Thank you very much. And if I'm not loud enough, somebody just let me know. So my name is Adam Weiner. I'm an associate professor of law and computer science at Swansea University. That means that I have a joint appointment between the School of Law and the Department of Computer Science. And my background is in artificial intelligence and law. So, you know, the combination of those two areas. And I just joined Swansea about 2 years ago. We have a lot of development that's happening in the legal tech and AI and law space. And my coming to Swansea has been, you know, part of that growth. A key part of that, the program at Swansea has been that we have a legal tech LLM, that's a legal tech master's degree. And we're one of the few in the UK, and you know, there are not that many in the world, that offer a legal tech LLM. And so, and I'll segue into, you know, how this ties into Docassemble. Okay, so I'll sort of go through the step by step. And a legal tech LLM, at least as far as we have it at Swansea, is a combination of introducing law school students to computational ideas applied to the law, right? Computational ideas applied to the law, plus some classes about how the law applies to technology. That is, you know, what's privacy, what's human rights, these kinds of things. So just specifically about the area of how computer science applies to the law, I teach two classes. One of them is an artificial intelligence class, where it's really a theory class where we talk about a variety of topics that have been under research for, you know, some 40 years in the field of AI and law. For instance, argumentation and case-based reasoning and a variety of topics like that, so that people have a broad sense about what kinds of topics have been under research and also how those might contribute to legal practice. The other course that I teach is something, so for the master's students, we have a course called Computational Thinking, and that's the one I'll focus on that's tied more to Docassemble. So the Computational Thinking class, we had 9 students this year, which is a fairly good showing for a brand new master's program. So Computational Thinking, we had 2 parts to this course. One part, the latter part, had more to do with Docassemble, but the first part is also relevant. The first part was really focusing on, you know, what is computational thinking? Because, you know, this is a bit obscure to people who have not done any computer science or any software engineering, and that's who we're dealing with. We're dealing with law school students who are in law school because they don't want to do science and they don't want to do mathematics and computer science, but they, you know, like to start to get involved a little bit in this whole field of legal tech. And what computational thinking is it's, you know, what is an algorithm, right? And you can do a very, you know, soft version of that. It doesn't need to be, you know, complexity about algorithms, but, you know, algorithms as recipes, algorithms as, you know, step-by-step, very clear instructions about how to start with something and end up somewhere else, and these kinds of ideas. How to take a large problem and how to decompose that problem into its component parts. That's what you do when you do software engineering, but that kind of analysis of a problem is not familiar to people in a law school. Why is it important to test and evaluate a piece of software that's developed? You know, those kinds of generic ideas are important to get across to law school students, I think. And then the idea of the second half of the semester was to get people involved in developing some kind of app. And basically to apply computational thinking to some particular problem. What we did this semester was we chose to focus on legal aid problems because it's, you know, public service and it's quite open and rather uncomplicated kinds of things to some extent. But Docassemble had been drawn to my attention by a colleague who was working in legal aid in the United States, who had started some development tools around, I think, eviction cases and variations in the law on these kinds of things. So I found that very interesting, full of potential. But what I couldn't do in 6 weeks is to teach them Python programming, right? That's just not feasible. I've tried this, and law school students don't like this. It's too detailed and too tedious, frankly. I mean, the kinds of concepts and the kinds of issues that arise in teaching programming from the beginning to people who've never done any programming and never done work like that is really very difficult. So fortunately for me, and working with Docassemble, there is a company called Community Lawyer. Are people in the audience familiar with Community Lawyer? I can put the link in the chat. That might actually be helpful. Just give me a half a second, and I want to put this. I'll put two chats, put two parts. So I just have to have this one. But the Community Lawyer is they're working as a company. But they have a social service component to their thinking. That is, they want people who are doing legal aid to build apps to serve communities. So one part of this is a very public-facing, free-to-use service platform. And another is the opportunity to privatize and commercialize your app, whether you're in a law firm or working in working as an independent. So they have this model, and their income is basically providing this supporting service for the commercial branch of things. So that's wonderful for us because we could work with the legal aid aspect and the free aspect, the open aspect. So Community Lawyer has taken Docassemble and essentially provided a wrap around Python code to have what people are commonly calling now no-code platforms, right? Where you have these kinds of blocks of code. You may have to sort of fill in some values of variables and some additional constructions, but it allows people who are not comfortable with building things from scratch to do genuine coding. And I thought that was a very interesting opportunity. And as part of that, we got engaged with the people at Community Lawyer who were very helpful and thoughtful in providing us a series of lectures. And on the link, you can find that they have a series of lectures that are now open to, for people to learn how to use Community Lawyer and, by the same token, aspects of Docassemble on this platform, taking people from the Hello World kinds of apps all the way through to pushing data and reading data from a database, so connecting it to Google databases, spreadsheets actually. What's nice about this sort of 5-step course that they've developed for us and that we worked through this semester very successfully is that you learned a variety, the students learned a variety of basic computer science concepts without really kind of looking at what that really means. So for example, introducing variables. You know, people have a hard time, if you're not comfortable with variables in programming, that can be a difficult task, but you know, variables can be introduced in context and with respect to a small fragment of programming code, and people can work with that. They learned how to use if then else statements and logic statements. They learned some things about different types, which can be, you know, if you're learning Python from scratch, you have to learn all, you know, about the variety of types that you have, kinds of expressions that you've got. They learned how to, sorry, I'm at home, so you hear some noise in the background. They learned how to generate documents from the input that they were given from the users. So they, you know, were given this tool to build interactive applications and serve them on the web, and then to generate documents very rapidly. And this was particularly useful because people could get, you know, really quick feedback about their applications. If you hold on 1 second, I will ask people in the background to hold it down. 1 second, sorry. Sorry. Hi, I'll be down 1 second. Okay. So they were very satisfied in being able to build documents and using their applications. And also they learned about how to read in data and write it to a database. And what people, I'll just sort of wind up with a couple of points that people were able to build, you know, using Docassemble, right? Because community lawyers just Docassemble with an attractive interface. They built a variety of kinds of apps. For instance, you know, how to be interviewed for immigration and be led through a series of questions, you know, asking a variety of different, you know, types of, asked for a variety of types of information, and then get documents produced at the end about whether they are or are not eligible to immigrate, along with some advice. Or if people are having marital difficulty and they're looking for divorce, you know, they may be led through screens of, you know, 4 or 5 pages of screens with, you know, 3 or 4 questions, and with some branching logic, and being, you know, led to advice, you know, guided to advice where they could get further information about their personal circumstances. Apps like that, and they found it very exciting to be able to launch these easily using the Community Lawyer platform on the web, right? So they could illustrate exactly what they're doing, show people what they're doing by just giving them the URL, and then people could walk themselves through the screens and get to the output without ever having seen what the code was about. So just to wrap up, I found, you know, working with Docassemble, using the Community Lawyer platform, you know, really successful, really interesting, great way to get law school students engaged with coding and building apps. They're very articulate in describing their apps. And the other aspect of starting with Community Lawyer is that there's a beautiful segue from that into full-on Docassemble for the students who are satisfied. So first we sell them on the idea of building an app, what that means, and then we could go on with a second semester and say, well, let's actually work with Docassemble itself, with Python, right? You already know some of the constructions and you know what you can do with this and you know why that's valuable. And now let's get into some of the nitty gritty, and then they'll be able to see, you know, how much further Docassemble can go. It's got machine learning components, you know, all sorts of things that you might want to add on to, you know, the Python source code. So that was our path through it. I found it really attractive to work with Docassemble, and we're certainly going to be working with it more in the future, and look forward to being in contact with the community about using Docassemble for legal applications.
All righty. So yeah, my name is Jason Morris. I am a lawyer. I have a solo practice just outside of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which explains the bright light being on the other side of the planet. I am also currently a master's student at the University of Alberta. I'm in what I like to call a made-up master's program, but what the University of Alberta calls an interdisciplinary studies program. Basically, I found an advisor in the law faculty, an advisor in the comp sci faculty who were going to let me learn what I wanted to learn. And hopefully that process will be finished sooner rather than later. I am also one of the two co-founders of Lemma Legal Consulting, and we are an organization that does work helping people build Docassemble interviews and build integrations between Docassemble and other tools. And I'm also the guy who wrote Blocks, which is it's a tool that's designed to make it easier for lawyers and legal subject matter experts to start doing programming in declarative logic programming languages. So the course that that Professor Weiner was talking about, where you're having computing science students encode legislation in Prolog, that's effectively the topic of my master's research. And the question that I wanted to answer was, why, if this has existed for 4 decades, is it not being used anywhere? And the short version of the answer that I've arrived at is because no one's bothered to make it easy enough for non-programmers to use. So I kind of fall in the middle between the people who argue for no-code platforms and the people who argue for code platforms. I'm trying to find a way to get all of the power of programming, but with less of the pain. So I have done some Docassemble work with Radiant Law, actually, and we had the opportunity to do some integrations there between Docassemble and DocuSign, which was a lot of fun. So now a person can set up their Docassemble interview, it will generate the documents, and those documents can be sent to the DocuSign API and have them signed and returned, and kind of add that part to the workflow process for Docassemble. Lemma Legal has also done some work with an organization in California that is similar to Community Lawyer. They are doing a low-code version of Docassemble. That company is called Documate, and we've helped them build some integrations between Docassemble and payment processing, so that lawyers can build interviews that'll generate their own documents, and a person can pay for it in the Docassemble interview, and then download it all in the same app. What I'd like to show you today, though, is a little bit more extreme version of the extensibility that Jonathan was talking about with regard to Docassemble. And this has to do a little bit with the idea of legal engineering that Adam was talking about. So I was a programmer before I was a lawyer, and I was always consciously aware that there were opportunities to do things with programming languages in law, and those opportunities didn't seem to be available. The tools just weren't there. So I just over a year ago started building a tool called Blocks that's designed to give people access to something called declarative logic programming. And the idea here is, it's been picked up by some people around the world, particularly in Commonwealth countries, in the public service. And they've adopted this idea that they call rules as code. And the story here is, imagine you're working in a department of the government, and you want to create a single website where anyone who has had a new baby can come in and get all of the services that the government offers to parents, all in one place. Those services are offered by different departments of the government, by different ministries. Each ministry is implementing their own rules in different ways. They're implementing it in different software, and they are there's no consistency between any of the different implementations. So combining all of those implementations into a single tool that will help you do all those things is not really possible. So this lady, Pia Andrews, who was working on this problem in New Zealand, started doing some experiments and thought, well, what if when we were writing legislation, we had a programmer in the room. And the legislation was being written in the natural language, and it was being written in programming language at the same time. So this had two effects. One, they were expecting. They were expecting that what you would end up with is legislation that would be easier to implement. And because it had been designed as code from the beginning, you could impose some standards and it would be easier to integrate different pieces of legislation. That was the point. What they didn't expect, but they also discovered, is that the legislation just comes out better. It turns out that having to encode legislation means having to explain it to a computer which understands nothing. And having to explain your law to someone who knows nothing forces you to understand it better. And so you avoid some problems of assumptions that are made in the way that we draft legislation. So surprisingly, having a programmer in the room they think might solve the technology problem, but it might actually just make legislation better. As a result, there's now a movement. People are looking for ways to kind of get tools that they can use to kind of explore this idea better. And that's what I built blocks for. So this up on the screen here is the Australian Beard Tax Act, Promotion of Enlightenment Values, 1934. This is an imaginary piece of legislation that was drafted by the people in New Zealand as a kind of experiment. And you can see that it's got a bunch of different things in here. There's a beard tax, there's regulatory powers, beard coins, you can sell beard coins. It's all very unnecessarily complicated, but that's kind of what you want out of an experiment. So what I did is I built this tool Blocks, which is a combination of two open source projects. It's Google's Blockly, which is for building visual programming interfaces like this one, and the open source programming language Flora 2. So what's on the screen here is an encoding of the Beard Tax Act in Blocks. So you can see the rules about whether or not a person is bearded, are interpreted here. It says we know a person has a beard is true if the person is in the category person, if their facial hair length is length, if length is greater than 5, and if their hair either is below their chin or it goes ear to ear below their nose, which is how the Imaginary Beard Tax Act defines a beard. So this piece of code gets turned into a file that you can pop up onto the internet. And then when you want to build an app, you want to kind of rely on this. So your app doesn't need to know what the law is. It can just ask Blocks what the answer to the legal questions are and proceed from there. So I built an integration between Blocks and Docassemble. And if you want to ask a question, this is what it looks like. The first block here says download and include the encoding of the act. So that would be the Beard Tax Act. And then you pose a question. And this one says, effectively, give me the list of people who have prohibited facial hair. And the way that this looks in Docassemble is, this is the process here of generating an answer using the encoded question. And then that answer becomes data that you can use in the interview. So I'll just run this and show you what that looks like real quickly. So it collects a list of people. I'm going to say one of the people is me.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet.
Oh, sorry, my Alexa is complaining.
Help section in your Alexa app.
We're going to say my beard is currently about 10 millimeters long. It is on my chin. It's under my nose, ear to ear. I don't have a beard coin. I haven't paid the beard tax. I don't wear a beard for religious or cultural reasons. And I'm going to pretend I live in Australia because otherwise the act doesn't apply to me. And then I like to use another famous Canadian with a beard. We're going to say Santa's beard is 4 times the length of mine. Also on the chin, also ear to ear. No beard coin, no beard tax, but he does wear a beard for cultural reasons. And we're going to pretend he lives in Australia. And that's it. So now what the Docassemble interview does is it collects that code that encoded the question. It collects all of the data that I've just provided in the interview, and it sends all that to the blocks.com API. The API generates the Flora 2, runs the question on the reasoner, and sends the answer back that Jason has prohibited facial hair. So if you wanted your Docassemble interview to answer a completely different legal question, but based on the same data, that is really, really easy to do. So what you can do is you can say, I don't want to know whether or not the person has prohibited facial hair. Instead, I would like to know who is entitled to an exemption from the beard tax. So we're going to pop those in there, drop that in the bucket. We're going to save this new question to a file, which I will call exempt. I'll just replace the one that's there. And now you can go into your Docassemble server. You can upload the exempt file that we just created. Let me find it here. There it is. And now we've got exempt in there. So now we can go back into our interview in the playground, and we can get it to use this new exempt file that I just added in. And we can go down to the bottom, and we just need to change the text in the final screen so that it is talking about who is exempt instead of who has prohibited facial hair. We save that. One of the great things about Docassemble interviews is if it's already running, you can save it, come back to it, and it accepts the changes right away. So I can just go back and say no again. And now it's taking the new file that I just created. It's sending that to the block server. It's calculating who is exempt from the beard tax, sending that back to the Docassemble server. And we should hear Santa Claus is exempt from the beard tax. So that's an example of a process by which you can take the legal reasoning part of getting a legal app to work properly, and you can compartmentalize it out, which allows you to do a bunch of things, like you can have the lawyers just look at the law part, and you can do quality assurance, you can do testing on the basis of that law part, and that same piece of code can be used to answer potentially dozens of different legal questions, to generate new applications that do new things in tools like Docassemble really, really quickly. I should also say too that I am, in addition to all of this fun stuff, I also teach a class at the University of Alberta, Faculty of Law, which is an undergraduate law course in, we call it Coding the Law, and it is a 3-part course. One part is kind of a survey of issues in automation of legal services, regulatory issues, professional issues, ethical issues. Another part is a survey of the kinds of tools that are out there for doing this kind of work. And then the third part is having the students go through the process of building a legal app inside Docassemble for a client who's in the pro bono space. The first time we ran the course was in August. We had 5 students. We didn't go with the community lawyer strategy. We just had them use the interface that I was showing you and that Jonathan was talking about with the YAML files, and learning as much Python as they needed in order to get through the process. And contrary to some of the experiences that friends of mine have had teaching lawyers to code, it actually went really well for us. And the students have submitted their project, which is an online tool for generating applications to the local landlord-tenant dispute resolution service. That project has been entered into a contest that will be held in April at Georgetown Law in Washington, D.C., where people doing nonprofit legal tech projects from all around the world are coming together to have a kind of a pitch contest and hopefully generate some excitement and generate some momentum behind these kinds of courses. They've existed for a while, but I think this is the first year that I'm aware of that several of them have been using Docassemble, and I think it's a really big improvement over the status quo, because My understanding is that the other options, it was 5 figures in US dollars before a law school could afford to use the software, before Docassemble became an option. So I think things are headed in the right direction in terms of getting law students involved and interested. And at least my 5 students didn't seem to struggle too hard with Python, but we had a rule that we were only going to learn as much Python as they actually needed in order to do their project. So I think that's probably a useful strategy.
Jonathan is probably the most modest person I've ever met. And I think it's easy to underestimate the extraordinary contribution he has made to access to justice with his product. And it is extraordinary also how disruptive this product is. So whilst I think the most important point here is the potential with this tool to start to tackle the serious issue we have with access to justice on the UK, the US, and many other places, I see many capitalist running dogs in this room. And therefore, for my talk, I'm going to talk about what we're doing in the world of contracting with Docassemble. And I think the key word here for me is the opportunity for disruption with this tool, he says, nervously glancing at the guy from Thomson Reuters. Okay, so let's frame this in contracting, right? So you can see me talk before I keep rolling this out. This is the map of technology as used in contracts. And in the context of that, we're fundamentally kind of up here in the world of document automation, and it kind of can fill in a role here of intake forms. Does this kind of make sense? It's on our website. You don't need to take a picture. We give all this stuff away for free. So this is kind of where we're playing in the contracting process with Docassemble. And it turns out that Docassemble can do it very well. But where I want to start with is how many people here are in-house lawyers? 1, 2, 1, 2, okay. All right, well, all the people who are selling tech to in-house lawyers and all the people who are raving about the state of legal tech and how it's all amazing and everything's radically different and so on. This is our data on what's actually happening in-house, and 75% of companies, this is kind of the business team and this is the legal team, don't use any document automation whatsoever, and only 4 have automated everything, and I'm reasonably sure half of them are lying. And some have done some, which is an exaggeration, right? 1. Okay, so basically, for all the companies, and there seem to be hundreds of them now, we were hearing about another one today, selling document automation to these companies, the reality is that you're not actually getting anywhere. And the question has to be asked, why are companies not buying this? Because it's a no-brainer and it's been around for 10 years. Well, no, sorry. It's been around for many decades. You know, we've been using Contract Express and so on for 10 years, ever since we launched. And the answer is because in-house teams don't have any budget, which is a shame for many of the companies in this room and this building. Okay, so they don't. They actually really struggle to get the attention of the IT departments and so on. And that's why I think Docassemble is so radical and interesting, because you don't need an IT budget. In fact, we put clients up on this pretty regularly. For about £600, you can run it on Amazon Web Services, a dedicated instance, and you're off. That's interesting. And this is what it looks like when you're kind of filling in as a contract. And it's not that I'm saying, oh my God, it's amazing. I'm saying, God, doesn't it just look like everything else? Right? And I think that's quite interesting that it just looks like something else, except for it's incredibly skinnable, uses Bootstrap and all the rest of it, mix it up there and all the rest of it, right? Because it's free and all the rest of them are really expensive. And it's also more powerful than your average document assembly thing because it's got raw Python in there, right? So that's interesting. Now, one of the things that Jason mentioned was a bit different from this one, is if you press this button here, it will send it to DocuSign and it will insert the fields in there in the relevant places. You may not know that many of the biggest companies products out there can't do that. I'm certainly not going to name names. And that was written as a library by Jason, which is cool. And also there's a tall, gangly guy at the back who's getting read about now, I think, which is my son, Theo. We're a great believer in child labor at Radio Law. At 17, they're a lot cheaper. Highly recommend it. So yes, so you can like send it straight to Docassemble, it's cool. But my point here is, God, it just looks like all the others, and I think that's really interesting. Second project we did using this is in the context of repapering lots of deals. And we have a client who we're helping, and every 6 months we put in place about 150, 200 contracts for them. And they all need to be customized and sent out. And what we've managed to do, because we've got this plugin, is we've chained Google Sheets to Docassemble to DocuSign. And oh, by the way, we gave that away for free. It's open source MIT on our GitHub account. You'll find it. So that you can send a tailored thing straight out, and then you assume they're going to sign. And I'll come back to that point in a sec. And obviously, it creates the documents as well. So if you have to drop out and send them a Word version because they want to negotiate, you can. But that's kind of press the button territory. So literally, we're running a Google Sheet with all the details tailored. We are creating we're running the process, the batch process in Docassemble itself in an interview. You click that button, and here it is in DocuSign with the fields inserted, which no one else seems to be able to do, but we gave away for free. And that's really cool. And then we've extended it. So now we're pulling all the data out of DocuSign and we're writing it back to Google Sheets, because it turns out that DocuSign's reporting sucks and no one can actually run projects in there. But we can now run it off of Google Sheet, which is incredibly practical and useful. So that's kind of an example of what you can do with this. I mentioned the bit about everyone signs and so on. I will shout out for a post that I stuck on LinkedIn today, which is, there is no point sending a shitty 18-page agreement straight to DocuSign because everyone will complain. So the reason why that project worked so well is we took it down to 2 pages of terms, first of all, which is kind of the point, which is actually the most important here, which is there's no point automating shit contracts. And although as an industry, we do that a lot, right? And that actually what we should be doing is rewriting all the terms so they're so boring that everyone agrees, and then you can use DocuSign and then it's worth it. But yeah, it's tough persuading lawyers that. Okay, so the final example I'm going to do is actually where we started and the final use case. So the reason why I know that only 4% of in-house teams have put document automation in for all their terms and our line, is that we run a thing on our website called the Radiant Benchmark. And this is the first use case we actually had for Docassemble. So what happens is if you come to our website, you can fill in a form, and then it does a whole bunch of stuff, right? But the key point is we're running Docassemble in a black box headless state through its API, which is an exceptionally good API. It's fully RESTful. You can do anything through it, unlike many of the other products out there playing with APIs. But how this whole system works is all built around Ors Lambda. Does everyone know what Ors Lambda is? So Ors Lambda is what your IT departments are going to find out about in about 15 years if you're a law firm. So it's serverless. So serverless is basically, they're still getting super excited about the potential of Kubernetes. Serverless means that you are running functions in the cloud. You don't have a server, you have a function. It sits there, it does nothing until an event happens, calls it, and then it will execute, right? So you are literally executing functions separately written. You can secure at the functional level the permissions given to that function, and you can start to glue things together, which starts to get really interesting. So we run this in Form.io. We are generating, filling a Google Sheet, so that's where the analysis comes from, because it's automatically changing every time someone fills in a survey. Hits Ors Lambda, hits Docassemble, returns a document thrown into S3, puts a message onto Slack, which sends the link across. It's super simple. But the key thing here is when you start to have these kind of open source products, that are built in same ways that are extendable, like Jason and Theo did. And with a decent API, you can build incredible applications really fast.
Okay, so this is Access to Justice and Docassemble. Anyone know who this is? Anyone? Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Taylor Swift, okay. And who knows why Taylor Swift was angry at the back end of last year, and who was she angry with?
It was to do with the IP over her music, right? She got sold to somebody else, which she wasn't happy about.
Yeah, so she couldn't play any of her back catalogue because somebody else owned the rights to it, and she wanted to play the songs. So what's that got to do with Access to Justice and Docassemble? Tonight I thought we'd try and get Taylor's music back for her using Docassemble. So first, some background. I first became interested in Docassemble after a post from Catherine Bamford. Not about Docassemble. In fact, I got interested in Access to Justice because Catherine Bamford posted something about how this ridiculous court form called an M2444 is terrible and no one can ever fill it in, and if you're litigating in person, you have to go to get help. And I came across Docassemble at a similar time, so I was like, well, can I have a go at trying to fix this problem a little bit? So I decided to put a couple of guided interviews together to kind of see how Docassemble worked. So I started with witness statements. I went to see Support Through Court, which is a charity for access to justice litigants in person. And we looked at sort of the problems we were seeing when they were trying to complete witness statements. It was some basic stuff like, what's the name of the court? What type of case is it? How you called a claimant, an applicant, a petitioner. And you've got to get the opening and closing statement right. And ridiculously, you've got to have the right borders and the right font, otherwise they send the form back to you, which is great. So we thought, okay, well, we can help a little bit with that. So Taylor Swift is going to create her witness statement to get her music back. That would have been great, but I think, yeah, I couldn't get the rights, sadly. Yeah, so she's got a money claim, probably. She's going to try and settle this massive claim in Sheffield, because Sheffield's cool and she just wanted a holiday. Taylor Swift. Some background music would have helped this, actually.
I could play the
Could you? I don't know if we can put the video up afterwards then. Okay, so we've got claimants is Taylor. Then we have our defendants, which have some awesome music-y names. You see that everyone else tonight seemed to opt for a live demo. I didn't trust myself, so this is pre-recorded video. So you get the statement. So it puts in the opening paragraph for Taylor there. It's going to put the end one in as well. So these are actual Taylor Swift quotes about how she's been stripped of her life work. Yeah, my musical legacy has been destroyed, and yeah, they didn't write the songs. Good. Pretty compelling witness statement, right? I want my music back. I mean, there we go. So carry on. So you've now got your witness statement there, and you can download this as a PDF or a docx. So you can either just take the PDF, sign it, send it off, or if you need to change it later, you can do that in Word. Yes, you end up with a witness statement like that, which is correctly laid out. So then moved on to the N244, which was a horrible form. Like if you are asked to fill this in, I mean, yeah, I don't know where you start really. So we started by trying to look at what a litigant person actually needs to know and getting rid of the other bits. So we did that to the form. And effectively all you've done is, yeah, remove the stuff they don't need to know. And then we start asking the information in a much clearer way using the guided interview. And then we don't show them this form at all. We keep them well away from the form because it's scary. And we give them that at the end. So again, there's a nice little video for this, but I think we'll skip it because you get the idea. And that produces a nice outputted form like that again. So it's populating a real court form. It's not like we're stealing the MOJ's copyright over court forms or anything. It does all the thing in the guided interview, populates the documents at the end. And again, they just need to either, just print that off and sign it. And yeah, Taylor can get her music back. Yeah, because what happened was, yeah, she did the original witness statement and then she forgot to pay the court fees. And now she's putting the application in to get the initial thing back. But there we go. So that's it really. So that's all out in an open source way. Docassemble, HMCTS court help, you can download it, play with it, extend it. There's a few things on this really. So we're trying to create a bank of these things. So if anyone wants to help, we could do with some examples of what good witness statements look like that you can provide to looking in person. There's more workflows, an N1 claim form and an N245 look like good candidates to go at next. If you can improve the questions, some of the questions are still written in English that you'd have to go to university to have that level of English. So if you could leave high school with a D in English and understand the questions, you're some way towards helping people fill out the form correctly. And also, whilst the form needs to be completed in English, you could translate the form questions into another language so that if someone's trying to help someone fill this form out, at least the person understands the question you're trying to get them to answer. So that's all there. Yeah, so if you want it, it's there. And if you want to speak to me afterwards, yeah, I'm happy and interested to hear from people who want to get involved in this project. Thank you.